Well, hey guys, happy Saturday. Welcome back to another skincare Q&A. Let's get into it because y'all asked some great ones. Can you use too much topical vitamin A? Is using a small pea-sized amount of 0.05% tretinoin on the face and adapalene 0.1% on neck, chest, and forearms once a day at night too much vitamin A? Using too much vitamin A, too high of a concentration, certainly can cause adverse effects. Typically, this is going to be localized within the area of application. It's going to be more likely when using more than one retinoid to a given area. So in your case, seems unlikely. One retinoid type on the face and another on the chest. I do something similar. Topical retinoid on the face, topical retinaldehyde on my chest. It's easier to tolerate there. Signs of overuse of topical vitamin A include excessive redness, peeling, dryness, sensitivity, irritation, and the skin is overall just more sensitive to environmental exposures like wind and sunlight. It just tends to cause burning and stinging. In addition to not using more than one topical retinoid to cut down on this likelihood, I also don't suggest using large quantities. You really only need a thin film. A big glob is not only unnecessary, wasteful, but it just increases the likelihood of irritation. You also can get heightened absorption when using concomitant other ingredients that enhance penetration, and therefore you may be more likely to get irritation, and maybe to the extent where you actually need to pause your topical retinoid because it's become too irritating. As far as the concern for systemic absorption and systemic adverse effects, systemic vitamin A toxicity, that is theoretically possible, but rarely ever encountered. It's theoretically possible that if you applied enough retinoid to a large surface area, or especially to given body sites, or if you're using it in body sites that are under occlusion, or if you have an underlying skin condition. For example, there is a skin problem known as erythema. It's kind of an end-stage skin issue related to a lot of underlying potential skin conditions like eczema or psoriasis. Severely impaired barrier. In that case, the penetration of a topical vitamin A or any topical is going to be much greater, making the likelihood of systemic adverse events more possible and something that needs to be considered when treating these patients. But for the everyday consumer who is using a retinoid on their face, maybe their chest, it is very unlikely that they're going to get to systemic vitamin A toxicity within the body just from topical vitamin A use alone. Warning signs of systemic vitamin A toxicity include headache, dizziness, nausea, vomiting, bone pain, joint pain, very dry, peeling skin. And systemic vitamin A toxicity, like I said, theoretically possible with applying topical vitamin A. More likely, however, in people who are applying topical vitamin A derivatives to the skin in conjunction with taking oral vitamin A, like isotretinoin oral retinoids, isotretinoin, acitretin, that makes it potentially more likely as well, and definitely more likely if you're someone who is taking vitamin A dietary supplements, which really can increase your risk just at baseline for vitamin A toxicity. In other words, it's unlikely, but there are situations where it becomes more likely that you develop internal problems related to overuse of topical vitamin A. Pre-skin cancers, how do you tell and what do they look like? So when I was talking about pre-skin cancers in last weekend's Q&A, I was specifically talking about actinic keratoses. These are precursors to squamous cell carcinoma, a non-melanoma skin cancer. And not all of them go on to form non-melanoma skin cancers, squamous cell carcinoma, but they can, and therefore they are something that we treat when they appear, usually with the liquid nitrogen freezing spray. It's just a little local destruction of the abnormal cells. What do they look like? Sometimes you can't really see them too well with your naked eye. You appreciate them much better actually by feeling the skin. They tend to have this gritty texture to them. Feels like sandpaper. They can be red, sometimes tan, skin colored. They can be thick, almost look like a wart. They are going to happen in areas that are sun exposed. So you're not going to get an actinic keratosis on your butt cheek, in other words. Occasionally they can itch. They can have a little bit of tingling. What do you think about adapinoid? Okay, adapinoid is a cosmetic ingredient with a very misleading name and a bogus storyline. Adapinoid is a cosmetic ingredient that claims to be a precursor of adapalene. There's absolutely no evidence that this ingredient works like adapalene when applied to the skin, that it acts as what we call a prodrug of adapalene, meaning that your skin would have to convert it to adapalene. We don't have any clinical data that suggests that happens or outcomes data. So in my opinion, it is an ingredient that has very little to no substantial research behind it, is often marketed in a way that it's incredibly misleading to consumers. I mean, it looks exactly like adapalene, the name, so you might think that that's what it is or that it's a retinol. It's not. So I'm not a fan of adapinoid. Why does acne on some people leave a stubborn erythema that doesn't go away? That's the medical term for redness, as a side note, if you weren't sure about that. And what's the most effective topical for it? I try to deal with it with tretinoin and azelaic acid. Is that okay? So when the skin is injured, whether that be from inflammatory acne, skin picking, some sort of trauma, your immune system sends in white blood cells to essentially clean up the damage and fight off any bacteria. And in doing so, it can leave some bystander injury to the blood vessels. As these immune cells are facilitating the cleanup, they release different chemical mediators, such as histamine, that cause vasodilation, meaning the blood vessels get larger to bring in more blood, more growth factors to heal the damaged tissue. They bring in things like vascular endothelial growth factor as well. This triggers new blood vessel formation. Once the inflammatory process dies down, in theory, these new blood vessels should vasoconstrict and not be obvious. However, because of the inflammation, they are somewhat dysfunctional and they remain dilated. They also remain leaky and spill blood into the surrounding tissue. And because the blood within these and leaking out is rich in oxygenated hemoglobin, well, to the eye, that appears red in skin types 1 through 3. In deeper skin tones, it appears to be more of a violet color. Now, importantly, this is related to blood vessels, not to melanin pigment. Inflammation can increase production of melanin pigment as well, but with PIE, it is the blood vessels. In other words, things that target melanin pigment are not going to be helpful, namely hydroquinone. There are some ingredients, however, that target both hyperpigmentation as well as inflammation and redness that can be helpful. One of the most effective skincare practices that you need to continue doing is protecting your skin from the sun. Ultraviolet radiation impairs healing and will cause this to be a lot more stubborn, because in order for it to go away, it's something that takes several months after the inflammation has died down. Those blood vessels have to be resorbed and cleared out because they're not really functional. To treat PIE, you need to focus on calming down the vascular inflammation, the inflammation around the blood vessels, and strengthening those little capillaries. Sun protection remains very important to continue because UV rays, they actually impair the healing process. Also, want to make sure you're moisturizing the skin as well to avoid further irritation and by protecting the skin barrier. Topical tranexamic acid shows promise. Topical niacinamide shows promise for improving redness and can definitely help it clear up a little bit faster, as well as, like you mentioned, azelaic acid. So yeah, that's great. Topical ascorbic acid, aka vitamin C, but it's ascorbic acid, all right? That may help to a certain extent, provided it is well formulated, with improving the integrity and the strength of those capillaries. Topical retinoids likewise can help not only in preventing the acne from coming back and generating more inflammation that makes it more stubborn if it was due to acne, they also have anti-inflammatory effects, and they also have tissue remodeling effects as well that can be very helpful. Topical vasostrinctors like bromonidine and oxymetazoline, very helpful. In-office laser treatments to specifically target the diseased blood vessels, pulse dye laser, KTP laser, and in-office, not at home, microneedling. In-office is going to allow for effective targeting of these areas and minimal adverse events. Some dermatologists have also had good success treating this with oral tranexamic acid, which is used to treat melasma, but likely works by addressing the vascular component here. Those are all options. Can sebum accumulate in and drain out of an earlobe piercing while in the midst of healing? No. So sebum is affiliated with your pore. It does not produce anything really too visible. Sure, you can have dried sebum plus a collection of dead cells coming out of the pore on the nose most prominently. That's called a sebaceous filament, but you don't really see sebum actively draining out of the skin. And what you likely are seeing with the healing piercing is either pus, which can can be a sign of infection, but also when tissue is healing, produces this kind of fibrinous material that can drain out. And so that's likely what you are seeing as a result of the healing process. Does sonic vibration really have any benefits for the skin and bones, such as building or slowing down bone loss in the face? There's no conclusive evidence that sonic vibration improves facial bone loss or slows bone resorption. Facial bone loss is just part of the natural aging process. It also can be accelerated by tooth loss and certain lifestyle factors, smoking, for example. And then there's also the changes in the fat pads and the redistribution there. So the loss of volume in the face related to bone and fat to a certain extent loss or atrophy or redistribution, I should say. There's no evidence that this vibration is going to do anything for that. Now, there was an abstract published in the JAD back in 2017, which suggests this was presented as a poster, not an actual paper, at a meeting. Okay, so the JAD will often take the abstracts from posters that were presented at the annual AAD meeting and put them in an issue. Okay, it's not necessarily a peer-reviewed paper at that point at all, or even a published paper, but the abstract is available for dermatologists to read. And this group claims they did a study that showed that daily use of a sonic facial massage significantly improved skin elasticity, fine lines, and sagging after 12 weeks of use. But honestly, I haven't seen much else of substance with regards to that. Do you know anything about the powdered laundry additive that's supposed to treat clothing with an SPF? Is it effective? So yeah, these can definitely be effective. RIT has one, the Sun Guard. That's kind of one of the more well-known ones. It's a powder that you add to your laundry, and it can basically take a white cotton shirt, which notoriously has a low SPF. It can take it from, notoriously has a UPF, that's the UV protective factor, not quite the same as SPF, but it can take it from maybe a UPF of 5 at best up to a UPF of 30. One packet is gonna wash the sun protection into the clothing, and it lasts for about 20 washes. These powders use Tinosorb basically as UV absorbers. The sun-clad laundry pods formulated to take cotton and linen to a UPF of 30 to 50. And in contrast to the powder that you add in, this is just like a laundry pod basically. The thing about these, they work best on natural fibers like cotton or linen. They don't really adhere well to synthetic materials like polyester or acrylic, but they're certainly useful, and you want to be mindful of how many times you've washed since you last treated that garment, but it certainly can help. Now, if there are any holes in the fabric, it's not going to allow for protection through those holes. It's only going to treat the fabric. So to a certain extent, if the fabric is really threadbare, that likely will not be as good, but it's definitely good. It's a lot less expensive up front than buying a UPF shirt, but a UPF shirt is a solid done deal, and it's lasting for the longevity of the garment, basically. The next question, what are your thoughts on astaxanthin? I actually have a very recent video on astaxanthin supplements. Astaxanthin is a carotenoid, which is a pigment that gives, like shrimp, crustaceans, their pink reddish color. It's actually abundant in microalgae that they consume. The pigment accumulates in their tissues. Structurally, it's very similar to beta carotene, but in contrast, it has some unique properties that make it a particularly potent antioxidant. Some studies suggest that it's a stronger antioxidant in comparison to other carotenoids. There are some clinical studies on astaxanthin supplements, typically using doses of 2 to 12 milligrams a day, dosed over 4 to 16 weeks. And so some meta-analyses show modest improvements in skin moisture retention, meaning they show promise perhaps for dry skin conditions. There also are some studies that show a statistically significant improvement in skin hydration. Unfortunately, it's kind of challenging to make sense of a lot of these studies because they often use supplements in the study that aren't just the astaxanthin. They include other things like vitamin E. So it becomes difficult to know how much of the benefit is truly from the astaxanthin versus the other stuff in the formula. There's also no strong evidence that these are going to be helpful for wrinkles, and most of these studies are really small, and every one of them seems to use a different dose of the astaxanthin. Plus, it's kind of hard to control in these types of studies for environmental factors that can influence moisture content in the skin, especially since they don't typically have a control in a lot of these studies. And the biggest reservation I have with these supplements is there's really really no good long-term safety data. Like in the short term, they appear to be well tolerated with few, if any, adverse events. Maybe a little nausea, upset stomach, but the long-term ramifications, we really don't know. And the reason that's important is because high-dose antioxidant supplements can act as a double-edged sword. While antioxidants protect healthy cells from oxidative damage, too much that can actually have a pro-oxidant effect. And we even have studies that suggest that vitamin E supplementation has been associated with an increased risk of lung cancer in smokers. And that's kind of where this pro-oxidant worry in supplementing with high doses of antioxidants. Doesn't necessarily mean that taking these supplements is going to cause cancer, but it does underscore the fact that we need to study them more before people just start taking them, because they definitely could have a lot of more serious long-term effects that we just have not properly studied yet. Topical astaxanthin is probably fine. It may help similar to like niacinamide or ascorbic acid or any other topical antioxidant, cutting down on skin damage, dryness, irritation, perhaps dark spots. Probably a safer way to go. Best to get your antioxidants from whole food sources in their, I'd say natural state, but that is thought to be the most relevant and bioavailable form is from food. And supplements, it's just kind of how relevant is that, and is it just introducing more harms? Can you dye your hair when you have rosacea? Yes, you can. So the can I do this if I have rosacea question is always going to be answered by, it depends on you, the individual. Rosacea is highly individualized. Typical things that aggravate rosacea are going to be heat, sun exposure, spicy foods, hot liquids, warm temperatures, hot food, stress, irritating skincare products. And there's a lot of variation there. Some people will find that their rosacea does really well with a topical retinoid because they have anti-inflammatory benefits and they help long-term with the barrier. But other people, ew, no, they really cannot tolerate. The hair dye thing is not usually a problem though in general for people with rosacea. The main issue with hair dye is not rosacea, but rather people can become allergic to ingredients in hair dyes. And then they get contact dermatitis in this kind of runoff pattern, like around the hairline, behind the ears, in the neck area. All right, guys, so that wraps up today's Q&A. Come back tomorrow for part 2. I've got a lot more great questions to answer from you all. I hope you're having a lovely Saturday. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and as always, don't forget, sunscreen and subscribe. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Bye.